actually start trying to find those courses, because most people feel a bit sort of not embarrassed, but reserved about coming out with their. But all three of them we created have worked very well.
Has that stimulated anybody's thoughts at all? I'm not looking at you on purpose, I'm just teasing, but it's
I think the other thing, which this panel session will be really interesting, is having three people, however many people with so much experience available, to tap into.
Well, Martin Squires quoted that there's about 100 years, over 100 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's really turning up for just for Martin's football, really. But that I think
maybe that
very
the panel is to wind it up with asking people to have a think, maybe have a mini brainstorm session.
The start point is, what is your passion?
Yeah.
What is your personal passion that you believe is really important? Having identified that, think about, are you prepared to share that passion with other people? And think of the impact that it will have if you do share that passion.
If you could do that on the panel, then I can follow that up with an email and sort of see that you plant the seed and I'll follow it up. The other thing that I'd really like to do, so that Tim doesn't have too much work to do when he comes back, is if you could email me with topics that you would like covered in future Doug meetings, or future, we've got a conference already booked at the Royal Society. It's my plan to have at least one meeting at the Royal Society, and the rest will be in Peterborough. So we have one meeting and one course, one conference, and the rest, everything else happens here. The reason we might not get a meeting next year in the Royal Society is they book up really quickly, and I can't put a date at the moment. But as soon as I've got a date, I will book the Royal Society for one of our meetings at least next year. We've definitely got the conference coming up in October, so speakers and topics for both conferences and meetings. Because we've now got the technology, I was saying to Steve earlier, we haven't got the restriction of geography to keep us from spreading our wings and trying to get people from overseas in terms of presenters. So if there's anyone that you've seen that's presenting from overseas, I can't come up with the topics because I haven't got the knowledge. I can get the people to present once I know who I'm targeting. So I can start doing that, and Tim can hit the ground running when he gets back.
But we're all sorted for this next conference.
It's for 2022 in October. Because, again, the trainer panel was going to be part of our Doug conference this year. We didn't have time to get good speakers that would pull in a crowd. I took the decision that it wasn't the right thing to do something badly. We'll do something and do it well. So instead of the training panel being part of the conference, training panel is now a standalone event to keep Doug going in an October event like we always do. Again, it was an issue trying to get hold of people at short notice when no one knew at the time when we needed to book them where they were going to be and how they were going to be fixed. So as we get more stable, people are more happy to book dates in their diary because they know what they're doing, so we can move forward with that. So our dates that we've got so far, which I'll email out to you, is for our, the 20th of October is the training session, training panel. Then 2-week intervals, and this is subject to confirmation of the trainers. We've got Stuart's course running on the 5th of October, Martin and Mark Stern, who's going to take over from Martin, is running on the 19th of October, and then the 3rd of December, Martin Squires. So we've got 2 weeks after the panel for the first course, and then 2 weeks after that there'll be a course. That's the plan, subject to their availability. I just want to throw those dates out to you because I'd like to get at least one session of those courses done this year. Because we're shorter on members, we normally have one free place for each member. I'm opening that up because we can have more people now because we're going to be doing it remotely as well as in person. So we need a minimum, as I've said before, 6 people, 6 bodies here. So we can have 2 breakout groups of 3, which we've done before. And hopefully more people on the screen. If we can't get 6 people, then we won't cancel the course. It will just be moved over to a completely virtual one. That will have an impact on how it's run, because if it's run in person, it's a day course. If the presenter runs it solely virtually, then it would likely be split up into even groups, even in the space of 2 days, because of people's concentration span. I think that's about it. Has got any questions on anything I can possibly answer?
Any comments from anybody? Any developments? Have you stimulated any thoughts? Have you raised any worries? What concerns?
How do you want feedback into that training panel? Do you know, do they have to attend to feedback, or can we just email some ideas in for discussion?
Before or after? You mean, if you can feed me some topics for them for the trainers to sort of discuss questions.
Right.
That would come up that you'd probably ask in a training. If you were having a training, if you're on the course, questions that you would ask, it would probably be better coming from your team, what they would know, what they would like to know. I know Whitbread did a course with Stuart, which is the initial course.
Yes.
So they wouldn't have done the other 2 courses. So they would probably be interested in expanding on what
Maybe.
Stuart did.
Maybe. I think Stuart's course is really good for, it's basically soft skills for analysts, isn't it? But the other 2 courses start becoming a little bit more sort of senior and or sort of management-y, don't they? So they're not necessarily the same chronology for people to go up through.
Yeah.
But you're assuming that all of those people are hitting the same level of seniority and management. So I hadn't personally put it together that there was a ladder that they could go up. For me, that they always struck me as 3 different courses.
They are 3 different courses. They merge extremely well. And I would say that they are full of life skills that you didn't necessarily need if you were moving up to management, that you would be able to put into practice in any part of your business or personal life. I've learned such a lot from all 3 courses, just in approaching different people and the way you talk to different people. I'm talking about Martin's course with here. It's I would think it's mainly soft skills that you teach, isn't it? It's
actually inner strength and determination to overcome obstacles because you believe it's the right thing to do.
Given that I'm a fairly long-standing Doug member and I've lost track of what the 3 courses are, is it worth having a bit of an email comms around all the members just to remind everybody of what the courses are and for what kind of candidates they'd be good for, just as a bit of a reminder? Because you're right, maybe there is opportunities for us to send some of the people who've been on Stuart's initial course.
this is why I'd like you to come along to the panel, if you could attend the panel, because then you'll get exactly what they're about.
Well,
I mean, I will do that, absolutely, but to see them in action and just talking about the passion, really, and as I say, the skills, the life skills of how you talk to people, how you listen to how you are being received by the person you're talking to, whether it's a colleague or management or even higher than that. It goes through all 3 courses.
Right. Okay. Well, you preach it to converted, because I know I've sent quite a lot of my analysts on Stuart's course.
Yeah.
What I haven't done is send them on any of the other ones, because I wasn't sure that there was that chronology that you talk about.
Yes,
So
okay,
that's
that's
the thing of
interesting. Okay, so yeah, I'll definitely do that. But I'd like all of you to circulate it through your organisation, so it's not just your teams, so that they can come along. And any colleagues you have working for other organisations, circulate the link. And it'll be a WebEx one. It won't be on Teams. It'll be a WebEx one. So it'll be hosted like the conferences that we did over lockdown. And
I don't think they are progressive, really. They are different because the people running them are different. And the intriguing and interesting thing from a delegate's point of view is engaging with that person's idiosyncratic view. That's really what it is. And so they're different because they're different people. But they're all really about the same thing.
I think it might be misleading, the title of the courses, because it's not progressive as in your professional progression. It's progressive as in your personal progression. It helps you grow as a person. So the skills that you'd have if you were a manager aren't solely skills that you would use if you were a manager. You would use the same skills to talk to your wife, your husband, your dog. That's the same approach. And that's what I got from all three courses, and I learn it every single time I go there, because each course is different because the cohort is different.
And I think that's something might need to be pulled out, maybe nuanced in some of the marketing of it, because I think, the whole
I hadn't thought of that actually.
join the course and you'll find out how valuable it is. It's kind of like, well,
Yeah.
I'm going to invest a day of my time in something I don't know how valuable it's going to be up front. So, it
Well,
might be we need to.
because Martin's taught me what managing an insight teams.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's, so I agree with you, Steve, is from the outset, I think, right, who have I got who's approaching that?
Yeah.
But if it's accessible and gives you insights at whatever level you are,
Because
then
what you get is how to manage the people that you work with.
yes.
Because we're
yeah.
all managing people.
So you're in an analytics or an insight team,
Yeah,
you're going to understand how it all works,
Yes.
or could work
Yeah.
better anyway.
yeah, it's definitely nice.
Yeah, look, I'm sold that I
Yeah.
benefited from that myself,
Yeah.
so I get it,
Yeah.
but it's interesting in terms of the selling of the course. There's a little bit of nuancing in the marketing to make sure other people who don't know marketing,
Yeah.
marketing squires or whatever, can see what that value and that benefit is.
I inherited the titles of the courses. I'm assuming that the trainers. In fact, I
I can't
remember.
remember where they came from.
And I think a rebranding of the courses might be a good idea, so that it's.
And just while this was going on, what hit me was one of the things that happens on my course is a problem which is largely a psychological problem about how you get your message over and what you do is debated by three groups. And they're constrained with what they can do because otherwise it would be impossible. And they come to different solutions. And I say, well, there's that group over there, and they're all these people in their company, and they're all experts, and all the rest of it, they say this. We've got a group over here working with exactly the same stuff, equally interested in competent and able. They come up with something different. And then there's another group, and they come up. So who's right? And the answer is everyone is right. See, and that is iconoclastic, really, to people who tend to be, very rigid, not rigid, I don't mean that, but correct in their thinking. Because we're analytical. So having that thought that actually three completely different solutions could be right leads to lots of thinking, I hope, in those people's minds. I have to say that wasn't designed into the course when I originally planned it. It's what I discovered was happening in the course.
I think there'll be interest from Sainsbury's. I'm hoping to come sort of, I'm sort of recently been co-opted onto a wider sort of analyst community leadershipy thing with a focus on training.
Oh, that's it.
And Sainsbury's have got a lot of people in those roles and quite a high turnover, so I think there'll be an appetite.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'm sure Whitbread's had a very big change and lots of analysts recently, so I'm sure there will be some interest there, I think. But my obvious go-to was Stuart's course. I'm not thinking about this other, so I'd be a bit interested in
No,
that.
I mean, that's been really useful, Sam, because I've been doing it. I know what the values are. Because I inherited it, I assumed everyone else knew. And I think it is the title of the courses that have caused the confusion. If we can retain the course title, but there should be a subtitle of, you know, or maybe just the soft skills of. Yeah, I'll have a think and see if I can, as you say, rebrand the courses, because
Yeah, it might not be a rebrand. It might just be some nuancing in the communication of what their contents are about and what you will benefit from by doing them. You know?
So it's always been a course they go in logical order. If you do one course, the following course follows on neatly, and none of the trainers ever planned that. It's just happened. And I think now, thinking about it, the reason that's just happened is because they don't need to be chronologically logical, because they do naturally flow through because they're soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
So it's you just sort of opened my eyes to something I didn't even realise.
Thank you.
You're
Not
welcome
intentionally.
anytime. So if there's no more questions, that's me done.
Good.
So Steve's put himself up.
Well,
No, that's fine.
I'm going to lead a discussion amongst the group.
Well, I'm pleased about that, because that's exactly what everybody will have a different view, an interesting different view about what's happening to us all. And I mean, my personal view has to be is that we're going through a paradigm shift. It's a long word to really say that everything is going to change. Now, I've been through a paradigm shift. I was born in 1942. I grew up through, actually in the war. I grew up through the post-war recovery. And nothing much happened except as I got into teenage, into teenage, things got better. It imperceptibly got better. And rationing didn't stop until I was 16 in its final stages. It was nothing that rationing stopped. It's all rationing stopped. It wasn't a big event. So the world continued post-war. But obviously after the war finished, it was the beginning of a paradigm shift. In my view, it took 15 years for that paradigm shift to work through. And its manifestation was the 60s. Suddenly, there was a huge change. When I went to work in the middle 60s, early 60s, as a research chemist in Unilever, which was a very open, beautiful modern building, very progressive. They were trying to build a worldwide research entity. It was a wonderful place to be, but as there I was, 22, 23, I didn't know whether I addressed that person as Dr. Smith. That person is Mr. Smith, and it made a difference, or that person as Joe. It was just complete confusion in terms of how you behaved in the presence with older people. And that was that was a paradigm shift. It was part of the change. And it took a long time for us all to get used to talking to each other with people we'd never met before in terms of their personalities. Probably 10, 15 years. So the paradigm shift is a major thing. And it's going to not be sorted tomorrow. I'll be dead by the time it's worth doing. I mean, there are all sorts of extraordinary things that are going to happen, which I'll probably have my view with the rest of you in a moment, following Steve's getting us working.
Well, look, Jan asked me, and I think also asked Mark as well, to sort of mention some stuff around sort of working through the pandemic and what's changed really. And I'm not going to go promising I'm going to drop bombs that all you guys are going to go, that never happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to all of us. But this is a really hot topic at Whitbread at the moment. because, you know, the world has completely changed, and there is inertia in our organisation and in other organisations to get back to how things were before. Yet there's also a big groundswell of opinion from most of the employees to go, why? Because the truth of the last 18 months, certainly from my perspective in working in Whitbread, is that technology works. I think all of us were a little bit cynical at the beginning of the pandemic that we'd be able to work properly and have productive meetings and collaborate effectively over online, over things like Teams, Skype, whatever it is you use, WebEx, but we have, and it's been amazing. I've actually done training courses over Teams with breakout sessions and post-it boards, which have been super effective. And actually, because you're in your home and you've only got the screen in front of you, you're actually a little bit less distracted. And so they've been fabulous meetings. Who'd have thought that we could do that 18 months, 2 years ago? It was always this like truism that we've got to be in a room for the course to work. Rubbish, not true. You can absolutely work, you can do these really great meetings, you can collaborate really effectively with your team. So technology has been a huge thing. For us in Whitbread, productivity has been a huge thing. I use the phrase hyper productivity. I actually think that vast majority of the corporate workforces around the country have suddenly become more productive. Why? Well, some of this is positive and negative behaviours I like to flag, but positives being, you know, we genuinely are multitasking. I felt a little bit rude earlier because I was responding to a bunch of Teams messages while we were talking. You might perceive that as a negative, but that's kind of the hyper productivity world that we live in now, that we are doing things whilst attending meetings and have got quite good at that. So yes, I am still able to do that slide pack as well as attend those workshops. You know, whereas before, you know, you were in the room, you've got to be present, say, and pay attention, and that slide pack will have to wait till later. You know, there are negatives of the hyper productivity. Some people have been working ridiculously long hours because they can. So, you know, there's a few watch outs on there, but hyper productivity has definitely been a theme, certainly in Whitbread and some of the other industries that I've observed as well, that we are doing loads more. And management will have to accept that if we go back to the office, we will do less. Is that what they really want us to do? Do less for our wages? You know, because we're going to have to commute and we're going to do one thing at a time when we're in meetings. And why do you want that? You know, I think the third big theme in Whitbread has been pragmatism. I think personally it's one of my superpowers. I'm quite a pragmatic kind of guy, but as an organisation, Whitbread is not pragmatic particularly. We've had to become it. I'll give you an example. Whitbread, huge pub restaurant retailer. Lots of food allergy work and sort of supply chain work in terms of the products we stock. And as we were reopening, we ran out of ketchup. Panic as a business, absolute panic. What are we going to do? Because actually the ketchup has to come through the supply chain from a certain supplier because we've managed the allergens and all this sort of health and safety stuff. Oh my God, what are we going to do? And actually the operations teams got together, a couple of conversations, and they were empowered to go down the supermarket like everybody else would and buy certain brands which met our business standards in terms of, you know, allergens and cost and all these sorts of things. Now that sounds like a ridiculous kind of scenario, right? But I'm sure we could all find examples in our businesses where we've had to do things a little bit differently, whereas before, hey, we're all going to have to get in a room and talk about this for 3 hours to make that decision. It's like, well, you can't do that. So what are you going to do instead? Crap. Okay, let's do this instead. And so we've had that sort of pragmatism as well throughout lockdown. And so, you know, 3 huge positives around technology, that sort of hyper productivity and that pragmatism, I think has actually fundamentally changed Whitbread as a business for the better. You know, there's other sort of side benefits that we've been able to recruit people from all over the country, not needing them to be in the office necessarily. So that's been really good from a talent acquisition perspective. But, you know, so this is all hugely positive. But now we're getting to that point in the journey where management wants to go back to the old way of doing things and getting us all back in the office. You know, it's true in a number of industries, you know, oh yeah, we're going to need you back in the office 3-4 days a week. And it's like, well, why? you know, and in fact, in some companies that I've got colleagues in, they're mandating people are back in the office and they're going, okay, I'll find another job then, because other jobs will allow remote working. So it's suddenly become this huge issue. And I was reading an article in the FT about it, and there is one perception of this problem. Actually, a lot of employees believe that it's a much more mature style of management through remote working, through lockdown. And, you know, managers can't micromanage in the way they did before and be sort of pouring over you all day, or, you know, in terms of what it is you're doing. You know, you've been empowered with that flexibility and that responsibility to build your working day and to manage your productivity as suits you and your lifestyle. And it's worked, certainly worked in our organisations, and I'm sure there's lots of positive examples there. Why do we need to go back to the office and commute and have your manager standing over you and attending loads of really dull meetings when you could have been doing those slides anyway? And so it's become this huge issue at Whitbread, because like a lot of the companies that are quite in bed with the government, as Whitbread are, the government is saying everyone's got to get back to work. Do we absolutely have to? You know, and you know, one of the you know, just a random aside, one of the slight revelations is that I've got a new job in lockdown on the basis that I can remotely work for this organisation. So this is a company I would never have been able to work for before because they were far too far away and I don't want to waste my life commuting too much. But they've offered me a job, and because they're really pro remote working. So I am one of those statistics of people who've gone, yeah, I don't want to go back to that 4 or 5 days a week in the office anymore. I quite like this. I'll have a new job, thank you very much. So I personally think lockdown has been, from a work perspective, fantastic. Been absolutely amazing. I think the only thing that had put a lot of pressure on in terms of Whitbread is in terms, well, and probably other organisations, is management cascades. I think managers have had to work harder to keep their employees lined up on the strategy or developments on the company. And so I think the management in Whitbread have actually stepped up to that, and we have weekly calls with our chief exec and we get a lot of download in terms of what's on his mind and what's going well and what's not going well. And that's good management. So I actually see that also as a positive, even if they're probably thinking, oh God, that's a little bit more headache than that before. But again, it's just good management. So I don't have anything negative at all to say about lockdown, if I'm honest with you. I think it's been fantastic from a work perspective. And it's about taking what and being good about it and continuing that into the future, rather than going back to the way we used to do things. You know, I don't know what you think, Mark. I don't know if you had any ideas that you wanted to throw into this discussion yourself, or if I've taken all your best ideas already. Coming off mute problem, which is common during lockdown.
I didn't know I was being teed up for anything other than what you just told me. So I hadn't really prepared anything to say, to be honest. It's not been great for, so lockdown for me has been fine, but it's not been great for GSK as a business. But that's different matter. I have a bit of a bugbear of this going back to work. I've been working bloody hard for the last 18 months. It's going back into the office. It's not going back to work. And that really riles me when that gets bandied around. I completely agree with the hyper productivity. I mean, not having commuting time has blurred into, probably half of that has been taken up. Pretty much everybody in the team doing extra bits of work. So from a kind of amount of effort that's gone in, it's gone up, but we're not commuting, so it's actually made life a bit easier. My team is now well dispersed over the UK as well, so we kind of embraced it in GSK. It was a lot of remote working anyway, so I think it was probably a smaller shift for us than it's been for some other companies in how it's worked. But yeah, they're going back into the office. I've been back a couple of times and it wasn't anything for me. It didn't add to my day. It was quite nice to see some people I hadn't met for a while, but that was just sort of incidental stuff. It didn't actually add to my work day.
Yeah, it's funny. We were having this discussion just yesterday with some of my fellow managers, and you know, we see value in being in the office. There are some positives around working relationships and certain collaborative sort of exercises you're doing, which you know, just because we're humans, is a little bit better in person. But the reality is we don't do those all day, every day, nor do we need to do those all day, every day. So it's almost, we've all taken away an action to go, what are the reasons to be together in the office? And let's plan to do those more, or structure them better to actually give people a reason to go back in the office, rather than mandating it and sort of expecting people just to go back to the way it was. So, but no, genuinely, I think, you know, feedback from the room, because I appreciate everyone's probably had a slightly different experience of lockdown. As I said in my opening line, I'm quite a miserable git. I quite like sitting at home and spending time with my wife and dog and just getting on my work. So, but you know, it's been a bit more of a challenge for other people. I don't know, maybe some of the more sociable sorts.
Has anybody actually managed to get the in the office, not in the office kind of combined meeting or combined working? Because that's something I've not had an awful lot of fun with. Because you've got this sort of, it's a bit like this meeting, to be honest. You've got some people around a table and then you've got some other people on video. It's always, it's just a bit jarring. Has anybody got that working, or is that something that is just generally?
No, that's definitely one thing that continues to be problems, and tech problems and microphones not working and echoing it. Yeah, that definitely seems to be one. But just got a counterpoint that we're actually back in the office every day of the week, so it's kind of more a wider problem, or as in it's a tax reason we have to be back in the office. So as in it's not a case of you can choose. But for me, kind of again counter to your point, I actually somewhat enjoy being back and social. When I was at home to start the lockdown, I just like very much miss kind of talking to people, just those random things. And it's kind of all those times where you're just like back-to-back Teams calls one after the other, whereas now it's just kind of, you can just pop around to somebody's desk and have a 5-minute conversation. So I definitely think there is some benefits, but of course, yes, for people who have 1-2 hour commutes, that's obviously not a positive.
So as someone who's Glasgow based, working for a London headquartered company, I totally agree with your argument about it unlocking the labour force. So not just new people in terms of relocated, but also how productive teams outside of the office can be, or the head office can be. So I was frequently the person on the end of a phone line while everyone else was sat in a meeting together, missing out on the chat on the way into the room and on the way out again, and also finding it very difficult to find a way into those conversations where you can't see and interact with people. So I think it's made our remote teams much more productive and much more able to have their voice heard and make a difference to the organisation.
Well, how are you finding the meeting today in the split sort of virtual, sort of in person? You know, I think because, well, I know I'm here, so it's working fine for me, but I've not really had too much of a problem with these sorts of things. As long as you actually treat the people here virtually as people and refer to them and look at them and ask them stuff and make sure that they're engaged and can hear all the comment, you know, I think it can work quite well.
Yeah, I think people are much more conscious of it now, having been through the last year and a half. So I do agree, Mark, that going back to the office has its challenges, and it's something we've been piloting and wrestling with just now. And what we're finding is it's better for those small meetings and one-on-ones where you can actually have everyone there together. And you're probably not going to try too hard to have everyone in the same location or in the office for bigger meetings. You really get the same benefits from it.
Oh, do you have any view about this? Do you have any views?
Yeah, kind of. I'm sort of somewhat positive, but as in, it's kind of somewhat of flexibility is definitely, and we are seeing some people leaving specifically because of that. As in, people just want to work from home, and people, me myself, my commute is literally 5 minutes from the office, so I can't say it's a whole pile difference whether I'm working from home or not. But so I definitely enjoy being back. Certain amounts of, but I think it's some bit of flexibility. I think there's definitely benefits of, as I kind of said, the just those quick meetings where you can just pop around to somebody's desk. I think that's the thing you lose, and also it's kind of like an after drink, going out to meet people. That's kind of how you get to know and kind of build those relationships that while you're at home you never get that. Yes, people are being very productive, but also work isn't all about hyper productivity. It's about kind of enjoying it, not just wake up, turn your computer, work. It's kind of having those kind of things outside of it that you definitely do miss when you're working from home.
building those relationships makes both of you more productive. I think it's easier to ask for things and get things done once you know somebody. So I do agree, it's important, that part of it.
Yeah, and kind of in our job, as in, it's like, especially when you have junior people, like some people start, and it's like it's very hard. Like they need to learn, but as in, if they always feel they have to go and have a Teams call, they're going to be less reluctant. Whereas if you're just sitting beside somebody and you have something the senior person is going to know, or he's seen there and done it, so it's definitely there are some negatives for it for sure.
Yeah, that is a good observation. I mean, I would say I've got a junior analyst working in my team, and I think she initially struggled, getting up to speed and collaborating on certain things. But actually, once she just got into the sort of mindset that actually you can pop up a quick Teams call just for a chat at that very moment and share the screen, and basically mimic virtually that hopping around someone's desk kind of thing that you talk about. She's found it a lot less of a barrier. But you're right. I think I'm a bit of an old git, and I think I know what I'm doing. It's a bit harder, I suppose, for new people who are coming in and maybe need a little bit more training and support. So that's it. That is a fair challenge. So what about you guys, Sainsbury's? Has it been?
Yeah, really, really interesting. So I think in contrast to Whitbread, from what I'm hearing, Sainsbury's, and we were kind of on the trajectory anyway. So about 5 years ago, probably about 5 years ago, the Holborn office was completely relayed out. I think 8 floors, we sublet 3. We got rid of everyone having a fixed desk. And at the same time, we got rid of fixed computers, so everyone got a laptop regardless of what grade you were. And what they put in instead was, stools and tables to seat 8, chairs for 1 with baffles and a plug, chairs for 2, booths, some dedicated workstations, and lockers. So no pedestals, no under desk storage. So that marked a change, and then that rippled through 2 or 3 of the support centres. When we were going into COVID, we were already adopting Teams. So about 3 months before the end of sort of 2019, which I think again was fortuitous. When we went into it, very quickly it was kind of sink or swim. It was adapt. We adapted really well, and I'm trying to think when it was. It was certainly at least 6 months ago. We had a new sort of ways of working policy, which was designed for when we were coming out of COVID, and that was all about recognising the benefits. And this was right from the top down. So we had, our property director lives in York. On a Monday, he would leave York, or he would get up about 4:30 to get down to Coventry by train, do the morning in Coventry with his leadership team, culminating in a half an hour sort of property huddle just before lunch, and then he would be off to London, and probably roaming around for the rest of the week. So he saw a transformation because he didn't have to do that. His colleagues, fellow directors, saw the same transformation and same benefits, and so the experience in Sainsbury's was right from the top down. This is a good thing. We don't want to lose this good thing. And by the way, actually, we're still running a business which has gone completely mad, because of lockdown, because of having to sort of feed people who were shielding, and we're actually doing it. So our policy that came out of that was, we're going to scale down our office space. We're going to reconfigure it. We will work on the basis that there will be somewhere for you if you want to turn up to an office. On average, there will be somewhere for everyone for 2 days a week. Now, that some of you will, because of your home situation or whatever, you will want to do more than that. Some of you will want to do much less than that. That's fine. Work it out. Work out what works for you. But come together for three things, the three C's. So come together for coaching, come together for collaboration, and come together for community. So that's the policy we've got, and we're just starting to live. And you know, when we were sort of in the summer, there was, you know, emails coming around saying, you know, if you can get back to the office for a couple of days or a couple of times rather, you know, from September we'll open them up, you know, but it's up to you guys to, you know, or everyone to figure out what works for you. The other thing is, this is a really interesting experience, because I think certainly this hybrid meeting is working well here. We haven't got the technology to do this in Sainsbury's. And we've recognised that by saying, unless you can all get together for a meeting in a room, you can't do it, or you shouldn't do it. It should be therefore virtual. Yeah. Now, we'll see where that goes. We'll see how that adapts. But actually, that's working really well. And it's helping preserve the autonomy of each colleague to figure out what works for them, rather than having management almost, or presenteeism creep back in and force people back into, you know, those office spaces.
Right.
So, I mean, Tim, any reflections?
I suppose the great benefits in terms of getting people from all over the country, well, all over England at least, and that's kind of brilliant. It's really nice not commuting. I mean, that's the reality, and it's and I think everybody has found that. And apart from only 5 minutes away, and to be honest, if I was 5 minutes away, I wouldn't mind going into the office as well. I think the thing that I've noticed, it was yesterday was the first day you talked about hyper productivity in kind of, you know, meetings in the office or meetings in kind of in the business. Great, you can, you know, when you don't really need to be fully focused on one thing, that's really good. But in those things where you really want to be focused on something, is if it's like a webinar or a training session, you know, a session in a dog conference or something like that. Yesterday was the first time that I watched something for an hour without doing anything else, and it was an absolute revelation. It was so good. It was so good to be focused on one thing, and you know, note to self, do more of that. But it's really hard because you feel like you have to be hyper productive. And so there's this, oh yeah, I just have it on in the background. Sometimes that doesn't work at all. It's completely pointless. You do two things badly rather than one thing well.
Yeah, you do have to be quite disciplined, I think, to actually go that this is something I'm going to need to really focus on. Yeah. Therefore, I am going to do one thing at a time at the moment. But you know, we've all been in those meetings where the boss is wanging on at you about something really boring, and you can crack on with a load of work and just listen to it, can't you? So you know, I think it's, you're right. You have to be quite disciplined about it.
I'd say there's two other downsides that I've seen. So I'm probably a bit like you, Steve, in that I'm quite happy just, you know, most of the time, you know, logging on, seeing people, but just getting on with stuff. Not the same for some of my colleagues. Some of my colleagues really miss, you know, the social side and the frequency of that, of getting that social interaction. The other thing, again, I'm lucky I haven't suffered with it, but I have colleagues who just go from Teams meetings back to back all day, and particularly, you know, particularly when they can't, you know, they can't escape someone finding them and putting in 5 minutes that becomes 15 minutes, or you know.
That's where I am.
But you know, we again, one of the sort of bits of advice and permission for everyone was, you know, 12 till 1, let's leave it free. You know, please don't book time in, you know, with other people or intrude on that. I mean, you know, for more senior people, I guess that doesn't really hold.
Yeah, I don't think I've had many lunch breaks in the last 18 months, I must admit.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's a mix, but broadly, I think broadly positive. And I suppose the other thing that I keep coming back to this because I don't hear anyone mentioning it, but there must be, one of the benefits of going through this sort of paradigm shift, if indeed we do, remote working does stick and stabilise, it must play into being beneficial for climate change.
Totally, must be.
But no one's really talking about that, and no company yet is saying, do you know what, this is part of our climate change agenda, this is part of our carbon agenda, which I think is an interesting one. Maybe if you're getting resistance, from a management class who is now feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think speaking specifically for Whitbread, Whitbread, for those of you who don't know, we are Premier Inn and all of these sort of restaurants and stuff alongside those Premier Inns. There's this kind of perception that unless the world gets back to normal, we won't make as much money.
Yeah.
And therefore, we've got to lead by example in going back to normal. And certainly someone somewhere on our board of directors is like this with Boris. There's the whole that we helped you out during the pandemic with all of the furlough schemes and the such like, and a lot of the hospitality industry. You need to start trying to help kickstart the economy, which is why we've had this mandate. And there's been this sort of tension, and it's just something we're having to work through at the moment. Fascinating thing is all our hotels are really busy. And parts of the airports, which are slowly recovering now because of all the international travel, yet not everyone's gone back to work. So, all of a sudden everyone's going, oh, okay, it's not as simple as we thought it was, So I think there's going to be a bit of a voyage of discovery, I think, in 6 to 12 months, not just in our industry, but lots of others.
But and the other thing, I don't see this in Sainsbury's, but I think, if you've got a management class, let's say, or a management layer whose execution was very much around, monitoring what people were doing, and that filled their time. When you switch out of that and become more leadership focused and have and you have to operate on a very strong sort of bond or foundation of trust with your teams. What do those people then fill their time with? How do they adapt?
Yeah, it's not something I've personally got in it because my team doesn't and my boss doesn't work on that basis. But we have lots of operators running all the different sites, as I'm sure you guys do with Sainsbury's, and I'm sure a lot of the businesses here do as well. And big parts of their job are watching everybody else make sure they're doing their bits properly. And so you're right. It's.
I think I want to interrupt here because being old, I think it's 1973 we had the miners' strike. So the country went on to a 3-day week. Okay? In 1973, I don't think electric typewriters had been invented. So if you typed something and made a mistake, you retyped it. Okay? So since 1973 and now, there's been an unbelievable, completely unbelievable transformation in the way technology supports us. Now, in the 3-day week, which included Friday, Saturday rather, the power was switched off. That's what was happening. So you had to work 3 days a week, and it could include a Saturday. Productivity of this country hardly fell. This is in my mind, a really, really critical part of the paradigm shift that we should be recognising. In 73 to wherever it was, we could do the work that we did in 3 days. Okay. So why is it that people are working longer hours, are more stressed with all this technology, and we are decades on? And the answer is, it has to be because we are being stupid about how we work. And I think you refer to this, Steve. You refer to the fact you are more efficient.
Yeah, I'm also very belligerent. I start at 9, I shut down at 5. If someone wants some time with me outside of those hours, I tell them to wait.
And you're more productive, and you're more productive. You must be.
Yeah, nosebleed busy during 9 to 5, but
No, you're more productive. You must be. Because you're working by yourself, you're more efficient, all this. You've said that you're more productive, right? Okay. Well, this productivity is jolly good, right, for everybody. But it should show, in my view, this is not being part of it anymore, it should show up in reduced working hours. The country worked on 3 days a week all those years ago. Why can't it do that now? Now, obviously, it's conceptually too big a change to make, but the reality is we should be able to work on 2 days a week because we've got much more efficiency behind us. I'm just being, silly, but I'm not being silly. Why shouldn't we be doing the jobs that we used to do? I mean, the point you're talking about, the meetings, and therefore you can do stuff in meetings because what's going on at that point in the meeting is of no interest or relevance to you. And I was querying this with some people before Paradigm about, what was happening in terms of time. And it seemed to be, tell me if I got it wrong, it seemed to be that meetings were conceived often to diffuse responsibility of the ultimate decision. Does this make any sense at all?
yeah.
So people, instead of making a decision, would have a meeting to make the decision. So a simple decision would take a lot of time.
Yeah.
Is this possible?
Yeah. No, I think you're speaking a lot of sense, Martin.
So really all this move to the future in terms of greater efficiency, which is what's happening, should throw an enormous benefit onto society in that work takes up less time. Progressive companies like you're portraying, describing Sainsbury's, and there are others, should be thinking we're aiming at cutting the working week. They should have it in their heads as an objective. We're going to go to a 4-day week and ultimately to a 3-day week quite quickly. I mean, I know I'm a lone voice in all this stuff, but the logic is there. And the benefit for everybody is there.
Yeah, a lot of the futurists, those people who try and predict the future based on current trends, are saying exactly that point, aren't they? And that someday in time, social security will structure in such a way that people will be paid not to work.
Well, yes, that's slightly different.
But the interesting reality is why we're not quite through the paradigm shift is because I'm still busy 5 days a week with this hyper productivity. I don't know if I'm going to run out of work eventually because I'm so busy. I don't know, but so this is the weird. I agree with everything you're saying, but at the moment, I don't know whether it's inefficiency or just quantity of work. We're not showing any sign of scaling down yet.
Something's wrong because the hours that people are working have increased. That's what's wrong.
Yeah, maybe.
And actually, they should have decreased. And now we're all being confronted with the possibility of that actually happening. We all know it can happen. Not less commuting time, less knackered when you get home because you haven't left home. There's such a big social transformation that could happen.
Yeah.
To everybody's benefit. And I personally feel this should be a top part of, say, Sainsbury's saying, we are aiming at a 4-day week. Or any major company being proud of the fact that they can pay the salary and get the work done, get it done in 4 days a week or 3 days.
Yeah. Well, Morrison's, I think, has given their colleagues the opportunity to do 4 days before extended days. So 5 days hours in 4, which.
But the thinking's wrong.
The thinking's wrong, yeah.
The thinking is that the time matters, not rather. I was talking to somebody who used to work in the research department 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he works at B&Q. He works in the head office, Rafi.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And he works in the head office running an analytical group. And most of B&Q has been furloughed, but he hasn't. And the managing director works where he works. And they're grappling with what they call a mental health problem. This is a thing that's generally happening.
We in Sainsbury's we've massively upped how we talk and how we support well-being across the.
Yeah, it's a good way of talking about it rather than mental health, isn't it? But what Bradley was saying is that the managing director be wandering around the head office, worried about the way people are worrying of their adequacy, and saying, "You're all right. You got the job. We recruited you to the job. You're doing the job. You're doing the job fine. Stop worrying about it." I don't know whether this is just one person.
Yeah, I think it was very. The two facets I'm referring to on what you just said there, Martin. So number one, with all the big furlough, I had to single-handedly run my team for a period of about 7 months, and those people that were furloughed were worried that they didn't have jobs. So there's been very much as they've been reintroducing them back to work, going, look, you did have a job. The company chose to take advantage of the furlough scheme because they could, because we were making no money. Unlike Sainsbury's, we really didn't make anything for like a very long period of time. And so there has been that kind of building people back up in terms of their confidence that they're contributing and they're valuable to the business. And I've had to do that with my team, as I know others have. The other thing though is for people, especially for those who stayed throughout it, is that burnout as well. It's just that element of you have worked really hard, and actually just going, look, do you know what? I'm done for today. I've had enough this week. Shut the laptop and knowing that the boss isn't going to have a go because you've had that high productivity for 4 3/4 of the day, and it's like, stop that. I'm going to go and sit in the pub garden for the rest of the afternoon.
But in a sense, I'm just going to stop now. But what I'm saying is, the world should have a vision that it is a better world, because work is not going to be so demanding in time. And the world is going to have more mental space for other things. I don't know whether, to me, this is part of what could be the paradigm shift, that in 20 years' time, people couldn't believe how we're working today. Anyway, it's fine.
Yeah, I think you're probably more visionary than most people.
I'll be dead then.
I'm hoping you're right.
Okay.
Anyway.
Is there any other things that we could get? Mark, you've been sitting very quietly to this. It's very unusual for you.
I was thinking about your productivity thing, Martin, and the concept of bullshit jobs. And there's a lot of them, and that probably isn't helping the productivity reduction in the number of days.
No, but they're just in the way, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Except we have, we need a society where everyone has something to do.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to take the whole week.
Well, no, it doesn't. Absolutely. And why burden someone with doing a job that really doesn't exist or isn't necessary? But what takes its place?
Well,
lots of things. It's ridiculous, comment. What takes the place of work? What is a requirement? The way.
No, if we're thinking about this unleashing this massive productivity benefit because we all wake up and say, you know what, that job isn't necessary, or this job is 3 days a week, it's not 5 days a week. Then
I can do this job.
Well, that's not okay. But then socially, the sort of the social economy maybe comes up to take its place. Discuss. I don't know.
I think the main factor in this conversation, the indication that the change hasn't happened, but it is changing.
Yeah.
We don't yet know what we're going to do.
The change could be 10 years.
But this is definitely going to be a catalyst.
But we're also grappling, aren't we, with the cost of social care?
Yeah.
Well, the obvious thing of social care is do more of it yourself, where you can.
Yeah.
Is it the payback if everyone works less, they'll have more leisure time, which means that the people working in the leisure industry working harder to give people their leisure because they no longer have to work hard.
No, but before this meeting started, you were talking about how your world is full of things that, you know, you enjoy doing and make huge contributions of, but don't get paid for.
Yeah, but none of those is being paid for, but I'm developing websites, so I'm using a website developer. I'm working on a program that someone's had to
Yeah, but
provide.
what I'm trying to say is that, and the camp groups that you run, or the organist role that I had, don't charge any money for, but we all do things for fulfillment.
But the flip side of Cubs is I like taking them out. If I take them out somewhere, someone's got to be there to give us the entertainment. So all the people that have more time on their hands are going to be spending it doing something that someone else is having to provide. So they're working. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that, like I say, things are changing. I don't think any of us know what it's going to look like in the other end, but I do think you raised an interesting concept. It probably is the direction of travel.
We'll end up with office workers working 3 days a week, and the leisure industry will be really stressed because they're having to work so many more hours.
Or it'll all be voluntary. Lynn, have you any thoughts? Right, have you got any thoughts?
I'm loving your idea around the shorter working week. I'm not sure it's manifesting itself in Barclays quite yet, but what I think we have tried to take from the pandemic and how we work then is the mindset and some of the process shifts that we had to undertake. So if you think about the beginning of the pandemic, there were loan schemes introduced to support businesses, government backed, that we had to implement really quickly to support our customers. And there were things we had to put in place to support people who were on furlough or at risk of losing their jobs, who didn't know what their future was and were worried about that. So we had a lot to do really quickly when this all kicked off, and we did it because we had to. So we're trying to look back at how that worked and how we broke down some of the bureaucracy and just got things done when they had to be. And some of that was people working long hours, but it was also working smarter. So I think it's been taken forward for us. It's not about working more efficiently, so working less. It's about working more efficiently, so getting more done and driving things forward than we previously would have in an organisation of this size.
Okay, so listen.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point, Martin. But I read a book about somebody who actually done that a while ago. He decided he was just going to work 4 days a week because he wanted to do his passion. And it's kind of, if you ever take like a Monday off or Friday off, or especially if you take a Monday off, you nearly get the same amount of work done in those 4 days. So you can kind of see the merit to your point. But it's coming back to the guy who actually self-imposed on himself. Are you going to pay people that they're only working for 4/5 of the week, or are you going to pay them the same salary? That's the next question. Are you going to pay them for the full working week or 4/5 of the working week if they're only there 4 days a week?
Well, I have a definite answer to that question because somebody raised this to me about a year ago. If the world only pays 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week, then the actual market in which companies are selling has reduced by 20%. So there is no benefit to companies in reducing their salaries in line with the hours of work. Because the money won't be there to buy the products. I mean, it's quite logical.
You just need to get all the companies to agree to do it at the same time.
Yeah, I think I'm with Lynn on this one. I can't fault your logic, Mark. It's the reality of it. Is the interesting
No,
challenge.
it isn't. It's the thinking that the world has, that you're paid for time rather than the job.
It's irksome paying someone that's not working. I think that's a shift in paying someone who essentially isn't working, despite whether they've done their job in half the time.
But
paying
that-
someone
but-
not to work.
But
You don't-
it's a measurement problem though, isn't it? Because we pay for time because
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
easy to measure, whereas output is not easy to measure in a lot of cases. You know, if I was producing, you know, widgets and paid by the 1,000, yeah, easy to measure, yeah. Clearly, I guess the company would probably want to pay me for my time because they might get an edge, you know, on profitability. But you know, how would someone pay me for my output? So much a meeting, so much for a PowerPoint slide, so much for a number in an email.
But should you be penalised if you're good at your job, if you're paid by the hour or whatever?
Well, no, but
The better you get, the quicker you're going to get, the less you're going to get paid.
absolutely, but to Martin's point, it's all a bit fallacious, isn't it? You know,
It's about trust.
it's about trust, yeah, and yeah, it's, you know, you could easily blow all of the sort of, you know, the time money thing out of the water and just say, well, you know, let's just cut it by 20%.
Reminded me of a plumber that came round to my house once and charged me 120 quid for approximately 3.5 minutes work. And I went, bloody hell, 120 quid for 3.5 minutes. And he goes, "Ah, Steve, you bought into years of experience." And I was like, I didn't take my money over to him. I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, fair enough." So, you know, but was I annoyed about it? Yeah, I probably was a little bit.
And, yeah, wedding photographers, the first thing that gets cut if you've got a low budget getting married is the photography, because they think we're overpriced. And yet, it's not for the amount, you're going to be there for maybe 8 or 9 hours at the wedding, and you've got 14, 20 hours post-processing afterwards.
Yeah.
Insurance, wages, travel, all the other stuff. And yet they give people the mobile phones, whatever you talk about. And you've got a Samsung, go and take Samsung.
In the block of flats, I live in Soho, and one of the block of flats I'm in is a small block. There are 3 people actually, who work in financial services, trading, for example. Their incomes are colossal. They have to go back to their offices. It's very interesting. They could be working remotely, but they have to go back to their offices now. And when they were working remotely, whoever it was in their offices could judge whether they were on or off, whether somehow or other they were judged. It was just dreadfully humiliating.
Yeah.
So there we go. Right, any other points? Anything else?
I was going to say, how are we doing for time?
Oh, we're just going on to, yeah, we do.
You have a comfort break after we've done the cake. And then I'm hoping Paul will be on. Well, not online,
Well, it's 30:30. We've been going for an hour and a half.
Should I take a comfort break
Yeah.
now and I'll email Paul.
Yeah, and what time are we going to start?
Have a 10-minute comfort break.
Yeah.
Coffee break.
You're happy with that? We all vanish for 10 minutes? Do whatever
Perfect,
we
thank
do in those 10 minutes? Right.
If,
They've disabled it, but it still screws up.
Sorry, Lynn, we're talking about a cashless society already. We've doing all your best content.
Yeah, so my connection dropped.
Martin, if we move on with.
Yeah, let's move on.
If we move on with Lynn, would you mind doing an early turn, because Paul hasn't turned up yet?
Yeah, no worries. What's your setup? Can you see a screen if I?
Yeah, if you present, we'll be able to see it up on the telly.
Okay, is there any chance, are you able to mute at your side while I present? Just there's a bit of
Yeah, we'll do that. Don't worry.
brilliant. Okay. Share. Right. Can you all see my screen now? Oh, sorry, I've asked you to mute. Do a thumbs up if you can hear me. Good, great. So yeah, the topic I was asked to present on today is the future in a cashless society, and I suppose I've gone a bit beyond that into what people use cash for, why it's changed, and what that means for us going forward. So if I start off with a bit of background, I'm sure most of you will know already that the use of cash, it's a bit behind here. The use of cash was in decline even before COVID hit, but the onset of the pandemic has accelerated that in several ways. So firstly, people looked for ways of paying for goods that they saw as being safer and cutting down their risk of infection. And the government supported that with the increase of the contactless limit to £45 in April last year, and it's just about to go up to £100 this month, opening up a whole new range of payments to that method of payment. We've also seen increase in use of mobile payments where there don't tend to be limits on the values either, that has encouraged people to pay more that way rather than using cash. And then finally, we've seen this huge channel shift over the course of the pandemic, with people being forced to use online due to the closure of in-store premises. And a lot of that has continued as we've come out of the restrictions. So both natural and forced triggers over this period that have changed how people have been behaving. That shift hasn't been completely even across society though. So even during the periods of lockdown, we saw that the cash usage of older people didn't fall quite as much as younger customers. And there's many reasons for that. So it could be that they were getting friends and family to do their shopping and that was an easier way for them to pay for it. Or it could just be their levels of comfort with the different payment methods. But we've also seen those customers, the older customers, are more likely to have reverted to the previous methods of payment. So their cash usage now is down just about 20%, while the decline is still double that for the youngest age group, under 25. So quite a shift in the profile of who's using cash now as well. There's periodic surveys that look at how people use cash, where they're spending it, but actually it's a notoriously difficult thing to track on a regular basis with any great depth. But the pandemic and the degree of the shifts that we've seen over this period have given us quite a unique insight into where that's having an impact. Because we know what normal levels of spend would be, what other factors are influencing it and how things have changed. So groceries are a really good example of this. So we saw huge growth initially in the use of online within grocery as people weren't comfortable to leave their homes and were shielding, and so turned to those options. But actually, as things have returned more to normal, we've seen the rates of face-to-face growth in grocery spend, or supermarket spend specifically, drop back to more normal levels. So there's still a degree of transfer to using card payments there, but actually as restaurants and bars have reopened and people are changing their habits back to more normal patterns, we've seen that face-to-face growth fall back, whereas the online growth has been maintained or has dropped back very little. The other trend impacting the grocery sector as a whole is the shift towards people using specialist food and drink providers rather than big supermarkets. So we've got two aspects to this as well. So there's the online meal box and fresh foods providers were hugely popular over that lockdown period. I think they gave people a way of shopping without leaving their home, but also a bit of a substitute at times for restaurants, so a way for them to produce more restaurant quality foods at home. And a lot of people have stuck with those habits as restrictions have lifted. But the other aspect to it is actually face-to-face growth at specialist food and drink providers has been maintained as we've come out of the pandemic. So that's independent convenience stores, grocers, bakers, butchers, that sort of thing. And I think there's a few reasons for this. So the first one being at the beginning of the pandemic, people were less comfortable being in busy places like supermarkets, so might have chosen to go to these smaller stores instead. But actually, as the pandemic went on and people saw the impact that it was having on small businesses, I think they were especially keen to support local businesses in their community. And that's something that comes out in our research, is that people were planning on continuing that behaviour once the pandemic lifted, and our data certainly suggests that's been the case. I think the other one that's harder to put a figure on is that probably these types of stores were a bit slower to take up card payments in the first place. And maybe in some cases the pandemic has forced them to do that. So there will be probably a degree of cash to card transfer in here as well, but I think those other aspects are coming through strongly as well. And actually the last thing is around where people are shopping. The working from home aspect that we've all been talking about, that's forced people to shop in different places from where they would have done previously. And as we've discussed, that's unlikely to go back to the previous behaviours completely. So we will see some return to office gradually, but not to the levels we saw previously. So that supports local communities above town centres, as an example there. And the hospitality side of the eating and drinking industry has seen huge shifts as well. So obviously, some of you will know better than others, been a really difficult period for some of those companies, and they've had to adapt their business models to be able to keep operating really. So we've seen huge growth in the online delivery specialists, so the likes of Just Eat, Uber Eats, Deliveroo, and a lot of smaller businesses have had to turn to those established companies to be able to continue selling their products when they weren't allowed to open the premises. Actually, the other interesting shift we've seen is changes in how people pay for things, even on premise. So again, as a way of controlling the spread of infection and supporting social distancing, lots of companies have introduced apps for ordering even on premise. So one of the interesting things we saw was that even as things started to reopen, we actually saw an even further shift towards online spend within this sector, because as well as the people who are still staying home and ordering their takeaway, you've also got people who are ordering using an app on premise, and that comes through as online spend. So a further shift towards card usage there. And you'll see from these charts, so at the height of the pandemic, we obviously had a heavy skew towards online spend within the sector as a whole. But even now, as everything's reopened and people are much more comfortable going out again, we see a much higher percentage of the spend in this channel coming through online as opposed to pre-pandemic. Not all the changes in behaviour we've seen have proven to be permanent though. So actually clothing was one of the sectors where we already saw quite a high percentage of the spend online pre-pandemic, and just under 50% of clothing spend used that channel. And they've experienced lots of closures. People have been forced to spend online if they wanted to buy clothes over that period. But actually, as things have reopened, we're finding that we're evening out at a level of online spend that's not far above what we saw pre-pandemic. So maybe it's just a preference to see and touch things before people buy or try them on, or it could just be the social aspects of getting back out again and meeting people. And I think a lot of the retailers are moving towards more experiential stores that might be benefiting them and driving that face-to-face spend in this category again. So I guess I'll end and hopefully kick off some discussion with, are we really heading towards being a cashless society? Well, I think what I've shown is we probably are, but we're not quite there yet. So the age profiles of the cash usage changes that we're seeing, that obviously shows that we'll continue to see this move towards other methods of payment. but actually cash plays quite a unique role that people in society are keen to hold on to. So according to the Bank of England's reports, the value of banknotes in circulation has actually increased sharply quite over the course of 2020, despite significantly lower cash withdrawals. And partly that's down to practical reasons. So people had less opportunity to spend the cash they got, so maybe given it by family and didn't go out to spend it again. Or some businesses weren't accepting cash anymore. They maybe used cash, as I mentioned, to pay family and friends for shopping while they were stuck at home. But also, this is something that held true in the financial crisis a few years ago as well. People see cash as being more secure, and I think the alternative explanation for this is that they hold cash as a contingency in times of crisis. It feels safer to them, and it's something they want to hold on to as a backup in those cases. And the other side of this is what people want. So there's been a YouGov poll, it was actually an international one, that found 37% of Britons didn't really use cash much before the pandemic and still don't, and a further 50% have used it less since the outbreak. But we don't necessarily see that as a positive thing, and wouldn't be keen to move to a completely cashless society. And this is a pattern that held true across the globe. So actually, the less countries use cash currently, the more negative they saw becoming a completely cashless society. So I think, again, it backs up this view that it's seen as security and a safety net for people that they don't want to lose. And probably as a banking provider and some of you guys providing essential services, we've probably got a bit of a duty to protect that for the more vulnerable members of our society who are still using cash. So that's all I wanted to cover really, but throw it open to the floor and your thoughts and how you see it within your businesses. Does that align with your view of it?
Sorry, yeah, to unmute.
Cliff, have you done any analysis of how cash usage varies by local market or by locality? And the reason I ask is that earlier this year we did some work taking some banking data and sort of scaling it to represent the market. And but as part of that, we needed to sort of model, try to get a rough estimate of the amount of cash that was being spent. And we did that just based on, on our own sort of, our own tills, which incidentally I sort of recognised. So, I think we were taking about 20% of sales in cash before the pandemic, and then I think, it probably went to below 10% at one point. Now it's back to sort of 12%.
Yeah.
But one of the things that struck me when looking at that is that we have a handful of stores, I guess, that, if you look at the relation or the sort of the likelihood of a transaction being cash according to the size of the transaction, obviously it's the smaller transactions are more likely to be cash, but we have some real outliers. So the one that always sticks in my head is Doncaster. We've got a supermarket in Doncaster which takes something like 40+% of its sales in cash.
Yeah.
And I've never really had the time to sort of delve into what might be driving those outliers. I mean, it's more of a curiosity, I suppose, than something sort of imperative to pursue. But have you ever looked at certain towns or across the country and seen those behaviours?
I don't know that we've done any specific analysis on it recently, but I wonder if it's perhaps the makeup of those local areas. So given what I was saying about the profile of people who are still using cash or have gone back to using cash, you might find that if demographic in that area is different, it leads to different cash usage, and it's,
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah,
there's as well in different areas.
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking that I suppose the obvious thing would be, age and demographics, but yeah, never delved into it to that extent. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the point that Lynn made about the social cut through, isn't it? Because of course some of the lower social class groups or incomes might not be able to have quite the same access to the credit cards or the cashless. That's a hypothesis with Doncaster, isn't it?
Yeah.
That actually it's a nature of whether it be class or just the kind of work that they're doing. If there's more cash in hand style work going on, there's more cash flowing around in the market. Therefore, you're going to see more of that in the supermarket. Supermarkets, as has been proven during lockdown, is a mirror on society, isn't it? So so whatever's going on in that local area, you're going to see it in the supermarket. But it's no, it's fascinating.
Could there be a sense of criminality?
I was
You always have some negative spin.
For some reason, there are few people who need to buy a lot of that stuff because they don't have traceability.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, but there is a link. Well, is there a link? Question, I suppose. I remember reading about the popularity of sort of $100 bills in America being linked very much to crime. Yeah, because it's a relatively large denomination of note, and therefore very useful. Or a very useful sort of enabler or catalyst for criminal activity. So I mean that's the other aspect of cashless society, or a society that relies less on cash. Does that minimise, or does that reduce certain levels of crime, or does it just mean that crime migrates to frauding cards and people with cards?
Don't know really, but that's ask the expert in the room when we're in. But
It certainly makes it more traceable where money's going. So it kind of limits their options. A bit easier to identify. That's the
well, the other thing I found quite fascinating about your slide, Lynn, was the fact that the more we become cashless, the more people don't want it to be completely cashless.
Yeah.
And I actually think this isn't anything kind of particularly insightful what I'm about to say, really at all, but just thought of it. But it was just like, it's almost like there's kind of the more we move to a cashless society, it's almost like maybe people are worried it's going to turn into a George Orwell novel and that everyone's watching us. And actually there's a little bit more sort of freedom with cash, isn't there? The man can't track us and see what we're doing. And so it's just a really fascinating observation on society. Again, with that demographic profile in mind, of course, as well, because I think the younger generations are so used to their entire life being tracked through social media anyway, they probably don't really care. But maybe some of the more middle-aged to older sort of people are like rebelling a little bit against the cashless because of the perceived control or trackability of their lives, really. And it's a social trend which I think we've seen a little bit with the anti-vaxxers and all this kind of like undercurrent as well, isn't there? That there's this like human nature of rebellion, and maybe that's what drives it, will stop us ever becoming completely cashless. I don't know.
It's interesting that you used a YouGov survey. There was, I can't remember the numbers, but there was more people on YouGov said that it was a negative thing to go cashless. But you're not getting the people of the age group, like my age, would not necessarily fill out a YouGov questionnaire, would they? And it's all online, isn't it, YouGov?
Well, I would defer to my market research expert in the room, which would be Mr. Callaghan here. But actually, depending on the survey mechanism, you can find that they over-record, older populations because they've basically got a bit more time and they're willing to. They have more opinions about things, whereas actually getting cut through in younger populations can sometimes be a problem with those mechanics. So
I'm going based by where I live, because the only reason I'm lumbered with doing these websites is because no one else has the technology knowledge to do it because they're just that much older than I am and that much, some of them haven't even got email addresses. But they would have an opinion on a cashless society and they're not necessarily being picked up in the data.
Yeah,
So-
maybe.
Also, we had 87% of people who either didn't use cash much before or they've used it less now. So you are definitely getting the views of those people who aren't using cash currently, and it's those same people who are saying you still want to hold on to cash. So I don't think that's entirely coming from an older population.
Yeah, so maybe my father, who's in his 80s, realised he couldn't get down the bookies. He soon woke up to online gambling. You know, you'd be surprised how necessities the mother is, you know, during lockdown. You know, but yeah, boosting own profits. You know,
But actually, we have seen those customers there actually now going back to the shops, as in to them it's more of a social thing. So while they came to try to, they still want to go back and meet their friends and go down and have a cup of coffee. Whereas if you're sitting at home, you're not meeting anybody. So that kind of older demographic definitely have reverted back to their normals.
yeah. But so yeah, my point being is I completely get that view, but I think it's a little bit more complex than that.
No.
You know, also to be frank, older generations now are a lot more tech savvy than they were 10 years ago. You know,
Again, this is it because I
So
come from
actually-
London and I've moved to a village,
Mm.
and it's frightening. I didn't think that I didn't really believe that level of difference in people happened simply because we've got TV. We're all seeing the same stuff on television. How could it possibly be different in London to where I live?
Mm.
And it's excruciatingly painful to watch these people who are in the same world as me, being them. and you know, they're watching the TV, they've got computers, and they don't know how to use them, they've got phones, they don't know how to use them. And they're taken into consideration in the same data that you're using. How do you do that? And is this just a little bubble that I've got myself into, and the bubble out there is the real one? Or are there actually two completely different bubbles in the world? And there's no.
There's definitely, I mean, this isn't another topic of conversation, but there's definitely a small but significant community who are slowly but surely being disenfranchised because they can't do the things online that are now mandated as only, you can only do them online. They're booking a doctor's appointment, booking
council services.
yeah, council. All these things are now becoming more out of reach for a small but a significant body of the population. Definitely. Yeah.
Is that growing or is it declining? I mean,
I don't know,
it should be declining. I wonder if it's growing.
It's a good question. I would hazard to guess it's probably declining, but I don't know. That's I have no data on it. So.
The thing I'd like with an older person is the technology, the interfaces change a lot. Or so it's a long time for a young person, it's a short time for neither. So you get used to doing something, having clouded it around. And so, well, thank goodness I've got that. And then next time you go in, it's different. So all the time I was relearning access points. I don't know whether it's just me, probably.
No, I observe personally, and in my wife and others of a similar age, that we are becoming less efficient or less adaptable, or spending more time doing the things that why have they changed that?
Yeah.
So it's a journey. It's a life. It's a journey.
I think basically what we're saying, we're all getting really old and grumpy on this end of the call.
See, I actually embrace new technology. I enjoy learning all this new stuff. I just can't get my head around how analysts take into consideration the wide differences that I've just experienced just in living in two different places. It's really,
Well,
it's like a completely different world.
I'm sure they do.
That's really scary.
Well, no, I mean, Tim and I sort of, periodically, don't we, sort of talk about, Sainsbury's is still, as a food business, it's still very, it's got its headquarters in central London. It's very London centric, in how it sort of, subconsciously probably, runs and develops its food business. How many of those buyers and traders or format people, go out of the M25, go to the southeast, go to Scotland. I mean, yes, it's a food business. There are a lot of things are basic and general to everywhere, but it still starts, doesn't it, from a very London-centric perspective.
It does, and you can see it in cash through, all of the self-scan tills, or and the almost the complete decimation in some shops of the ability to pay in cash, and that is purely driven by the fact that all of those people in London are surrounded by those types of initiative and see it as the way forward, and they're probably a decade ahead of many other people in Doncaster, maybe even more than a decade ahead of people in Doncaster, which is, I suppose, it's the innovation diffusion theory, isn't it? Spreading out from London, but it's problematic.
I never bought into that at all.
No.
Yeah. Wow.
You're part of it. You're producing it.
It's bizarre. Just even the race side of it. I mean, London schools and so forth, and then
you're isolated out there on the screen. You should be participating and arguing with these people.
Well, I've got a question for Lynn, because the thing that really fascinates me about the graph that you showed, Lynn, was the industries that changed during COVID and then just bounced right back to how they were beforehand. And I think, based on some of the analysis or research you've done, even as just general things, which are the industries which seem to have been fundamentally changed forever by what's happened? Because, because I think it comes right back to all that stuff we were talking about at the end of the meeting. Some stuff has changed for good, doesn't it? And some stuff like clothes shopping has bounced back to pre-COVID, which, we can all sort of like pontificate why that is, but it's those areas where things have changed forever that, we're going to see, Polaroid cameras going out of business sort of thing in future, aren't we? Because of that paradigm change that Martin talked about earlier.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there are any others beyond the ones I talked about today that I could call out. So travel's obviously the one that's still struggling massively at the moment. What we've learned is it's quite hard to make predictions about any of this, because the things that you don't know have a bigger impact than the things that you do. So things like changing the rules for PCR testing and changing the red list have a much bigger impact on that stuff than any trend data could ever see. So that one, the dynamic there, and probably we're seeing quite good spend in hospitality in this country just now. It's from people going abroad for holidays to vacations. Whether that's a pattern that continues, it's really interesting to see, because there's obviously environmental impacts there of people using air travel. There's it's a really interesting dynamic, because it not only relies on people here, what we choose to do in this country, but also people in other countries and how confident they are visiting the UK, where that balance comes up. So there's some really interesting stuff on that.
It's a slightly unfair question, because you're absolutely right. There's not enough data points, but I know in the hospitality business, Premier Inn, we couldn't be busier at the moment, and we absolutely couldn't be busier. Is that part of a long-term trend, or is that just a reaction because you can't fly away on holiday? Remains to be seen. We're certainly getting a lot back from research and from our customer feedback that people are waking up to the fact they had so much more on their doorstep, but you know, I'm also aware that EasyJet are now selling flights cheaper than my train ticket here to Peterborough. Now that all the red list countries are beginning to sort of drop off, so are we just going to fall back into our pattern of behaviour we had before? I just don't know. But it's but no, the one trend I made a little note of was the one around the online food delivery, which looks as if that may be a semi-permanent trend post-COVID. Now, that's a really fascinating one for us in the hospitality industry, because we didn't react to that. We talked about it, we procrastinated, and we didn't do anything about that. Could we have? Yeah, absolutely, but we didn't. And it would be interesting to see if that hits our restaurant business take, you know, long term in the future.
Yeah, so I actually think before COVID, where I would see there's been a bit of generation shift in people for entertainment as well, and a lot of the younger people are not socialising quite as much as my generation would. So you would see the growth in things like digital subscriptions, your TV streaming services, and music streaming, and I guess what people do when they're enjoying those things is they order food home and enjoy it that way rather than going out to premises. So I think it's one of the ones that COVID has accelerated and made more obvious, but actually something was going on pre-pandemic as well.
Yeah, we always need the data points in a year's time, don't we?
I was interested in that increase on online delivery of food, which I see extraordinarily in my position in central London, where you can hardly move your eyes without seeing it another aggressive Deliveroo driver driving everywhere in the right direction. What puzzles me is you can buy exactly the same stuff, or virtually the same stuff that you would have delivered by Deliveroo in Marks and Spencer's. You can shove it in your freezer, at half the price. Shove it in your freezer. You don't have to wait 20 to 40 minutes to actually eat it. I can't understand the logic behind this growth at all.
It's in your freezer, you have to wait the 30, 40 minutes to defrost it and then cook it. If you get hungry, to Deliveroo, 20 minutes later, you're eating.
With a bit of luck.
It's an instant gratification generation.
But it isn't instant.
Well, yeah, I know what you mean.
Amount of work involved in actually ordering something.
Well, yeah, I guess you haven't had to make the decision ahead of time, have you?
But you buy a load. Oh, so this is, by the way, it's just the absurdity of social.
And not apart from maybe Owen here on the call and Lynn, you know, we probably don't have the right demographic to answer that question because we've probably done all that a little bit over, haven't we? So, but yeah, you know, it's the fascinating thing about change, isn't it?
Well, in Sainsbury's, we've had an uptake of from our convenience stores of Uber Eats and Deliveroo. So we call it marketplace, but we take orders through those, or we have orders fulfilled through those channels, and it's quite significant enough that for our analytics we have to split out those sales so we can sort of see the effect of them and remove the effect of them when we're looking at sort of competitor impacts and things like that. So yeah, it's significant.
Yeah,
I don't buy into it myself. I don't. For me, it's even online grocery delivery is the economics of it are just crazy for the companies involved. But you can't not do it.
Yes.
Essentially, you're investing to dilute your business, to dilute your profitability.
but if you don't ride that cultural change, you will be out. But you'll be out.
You can't
altogether.
You can't not do it. We're all sort of we've brought into that trajectory, and we all have to be.
Yeah.
But it will require lots and lots of capital investment over the next 5 to 10 years. Reconfiguration of store estates, excess space in supermarkets for a market that is essentially fixed or shrinking because of the growth of these other channels?
Well, look, the pair of you are photographers, and invested heavily in digital photography, you know, to try and stay in that market, whilst at the same time we can all take just as good pictures. You know, so it's exactly the same. But you know, if you're not in the pond, you're completely dead.
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
you know, even if the pond's shrinking, you go trying really hard to stay in that market. So it's
Just as an aside, Paul's trying to get in and he can't, despite me sending a link twice. So I'm not sure whether he's going to carry on trying.
What's happening there?
He can't, the link doesn't work for him. It's the same link that everyone else has joined with. But he's having trouble getting in.
you might have a fire.
Can we try and get in, just to see whether something's wrong? Could you try and get in?
I'll try
You try and
and
get
link
link
him.
in.
Anyway, look, no, thank you, Lynn. That was really interesting. You know, it's, obviously raises more questions than answers, doesn't it? Because we're still sort of midway through the change. But no, it's really good. Was that all based on market research data, or is that as much to do with sort of analytics of your card transactions?
No, most of that's analysis of these customer transactions. So the questions you were asking about where things are changing than others, we can go down to all that level of detail. It's just that you ran through today. But some really interesting changes in like state change you would normally see over the course of a generation in a couple of months. It's crazy.
Yeah, it must be.
Kind of linked to this again last year. It's seen obviously digital currencies and cryptocurrencies seen a massive growth, and read sometime last week that now you're seeing Wells Fargo and some of the US banks are actually starting to offer it to customers. Is this something you think is going to come for the UK banks? It just seems like one of those ones where it's kind of it's here to stay at this stage. And how are you kind of dealing with these digital currencies?
So it's not my area of expertise, so I won't claim to be talking for Barclays here, but my guess would be that they're a bit too black box for the big banks to operate in. So the money laundering stuff we were talking about before, it makes it a lot more difficult to track where money's coming from and where it's going to. So I'm not sure it's that Barclays will be getting into, but like I said, it's not my expertise.
I can't join because I've got to use my Cub email address because that's the only one that's got Teams on it and I can't remember the password.
Did you want me to kick my laptop up and try?
Just a check.
I suspect he's probably having some kind of firewall issue or something. But
Paul raises this interesting thing about on this paper that he sent out about monitoring moves, house moves. Don't know whether anybody's read that. It seems to be extremely comprehensive, tracking every house move, almost every house move. But I was wondering what value would that be? I'm not disputing its value, but what value that might be to anybody in town. So I could imagine it could be very valuable, but I'm having difficulty imagining how. I mean, it seems such an interesting data set.
I would have thought with those sort of businesses which have got quite a residential focus, like supermarkets or your big superstores rather than the urban centres, there's probably quite some interest. It's like travel to work statistics in the census, isn't it? It's like knowing where people were and where they are now and how that social mix has changed, and you know.
Yeah, it's kind of it should be useful, but I'm not sure it is. In that, you know, someone could move into a house, has to be a house there, and therefore we probably have someone living in it already.
Well, yeah, I think it accepts that.
Yeah.
But it's just showing how the population is moving.
Yeah.
Around. I don't know what. This might be interesting if you could get in line and could. When, for example, our house is being served already by a supermarket or the supermarkets around it. So what happens when there's this flux to I can't get it in my head, really, but it's sort of interesting. It sounds really rather interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I
If we
think,
could get hold of the data, or you could get hold of the data.
yeah.
So I think it's really interesting just now, especially with the dynamic. I think it's opened up opportunities for people to move out of London is the biggest example you see. And I think there was lots of reporting searches over the pandemic, and it was people looking to move to somewhere they wanted to live rather than somewhere that was close to their work. I think has been a huge shift in that as well, that type of data would be really interesting for, because people who used to do things in the city when they were at work are now doing things next to their homes. That's potentially a whole new of demand that just wasn't there before for certain products and services.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the things we've talked about recently is whether we should be looking at price paid data for housing transactions and seeing where, you know, where there's a higher than average appreciation as an indication of higher demand to live in certain places, you know, certain areas of the country. Question, I suppose, is always a question to come back to is what's the so what for how we would use it.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, potentially interesting to know, and it might then focus our efforts to say, okay, so who are the people how's the affluence or the, you know, the demographics of an area, how's that changing? But we, you know, in truth, we don't. I guess we haven't done it because we can't really think of how we would move on that as a business.
Well, that was my question,
Yeah.
really, wasn't it? It sort of feels intrusive, but especially now that we believe that people are really going to start moving around the country.
Well, I've had one of my team move to London, you know, from the Midlands, where we're based. So our contracts have changed in Sainsbury's, so we now have two sort of work locations in our contract. It's for us it's Coventry, but it's also our home. So for one of my team, her office location is still Coventry, but she lives in London. You know, so yeah, she's at least some cases of that one young person going to London, looking at the trend as opposed to people moving out.
I think the thing is, for a business like yours, it's probably micro trends really. And you know, the obvious way of, you'll probably see some of the big trends in some of the demographic data, and you'll see some of the micro trends in your range planning data anyway, what's coming through on the Nectar card or whatever, in your club card in Tesco. So you probably don't need that data because you're already seeing it for your, so
But
you know, that's a,
what you don't see is what those people spend outside of your stores. If the demographic is changing, but you're still attracting the same type of customers, then you're missing out on opportunity. So the opportunity side of the way to see that, not necessarily the history, but
I can join. I'll just come out of it before I call major Jimi Hendrix feedback or something. But yeah, okay, yeah. So yeah, I
It
know.
works, okay. So this is Paul's end.
Small sense problem.
The other thing that strikes me as a general thing, while we're still waiting for Paul to get in on lunch, is that what's people's view on inflation? Because logically, inflation should go through the roof. I mean, I'm not an economist, but it seems to me that lots and lots of money has been spent, lots and lots of debt has been made. We should have another sort of 70s style inflation run.
So I think there's practical drivers of the inflation now as well. So the fuel prices increasing pushes up the cost of everything, of getting things from one place to another. And yeah, that's not something that's going away quickly. I think the fear of inflation to start this horrible cycle as well. panic buying thing because people are worried short demand goes up, then prices are probably going to go up as well. So it's definitely something we need to keep an eye out.
I think, I'm far from being an economist. In fact, to the point where I probably don't even notice inflation. But, to some extent, isn't it all about keeping up with the Joneses inflation? Where, if everyone's screwed, then everyone's got a problem.
No, it's not. It affects people differently.
So,
When I bought a house, right, it was at a house high price. It's just gone through the roof again. But the banks had, and inflation was happening, as we probably connected to that. Banks didn't register this for about 2 years and then started putting the interest rate up. So when I bought the house in 72, 73, it was the mortgage rate was 7%, right? 2 years later, it was 12%. So what it meant is the mortgage payments doubled. So this is really quite a shock to anybody who's got a new mortgage, isn't it? But my income went up with inflation, but my debt didn't. The net effect was I bought the house, paid off the debt very, very quickly. And I just, so the inflation has benefited me in the personal circumstances I'm in. I'm wondering if we're going to have rapid inflation again with all the debt that is around. So I don't know anything about economics, but it strikes me that tends to lead to inflation. And there are going to be some big winners as well as big losers. The losers will obviously people who have cash in the bank, but not in investments.
I would say, I am an economist, or I did my degree in economics.
right, you've got all
I'm clearly not an economist. So, but one of the things that we had in the 70s was we had a labour market that was very differently structured. And the question I suppose I've got thinking about the difference now is, like the 70s, we've got a number of price shocks coming in. The thing with the 70s, I think, is that those price shocks stayed around for much longer because, or at least partly because of the structure of the labour market and the level of unionisation and pay rounds. We still have implicit pay rounds, I suppose, now, but I'm not sure that the effects will sort of circulate for as long. I think they might decay more, but I don't know.
I just wonder whether it's another thing lurking in a potentially big thing lurking in the background.
I mean, I was listening to something this morning, and the view there was in the short term, inflation will make people probably feel good, because they'll see their wages going up a bit quicker. It won't mean anything in real terms, but there will be some short term sort of benefit from that in terms of how people feel.
But then the impact, I don't know what I'm talking about, but then the impact on interest rates, isn't it?
Yeah, it has to play out through interest rates because that's the Bank of England's job. Their one policy instrument really for inflation is interest rate. So what they're going to do, they're going to put them up. They think that's the only way of bringing inflation, or inflationary growth to a certain level. So.
But if it's sort of the world inflation, won't it? It'll happen everywhere. Whatever that means, does that mean nothing will happen because all the currencies will?
yeah, that's my point. If everyone's in the same boat, then do you even notice? Because,
Not everyone's in the same boat, so things like utility price rises will impact some people disproportionately because of how what income they've got, how much discretionary income they've got, and there's other aspects to it that will affect more than others as well. What kind of sector you work in, So obviously some really interesting stuff going on just now with the HGV drivers, and I see what you're saying about the labour market different, but do you think the shift in demand for different types of how this plays in?
I mean, it's a good point. I think, I mean, the other thing that is not in our favour now is particularly we've got a very tight labour market, and a very, a very isolated labour market, unless the government is going to do something radical with its, with its sort of immigration, policy, to meet those gaps. So, so that certainly I would say isn't favourable, and there is, I think we are, well, question. I see that we are more concerned now with getting a more equal society, and that means more equal pay, or narrowing sort of the gap up, the range on incomes. But that in itself is fraught, because as you push the minimum wage up, there is natural pressure for relative wage differentials to be maintained. So that again plays itself through. So yeah, it's we could be heading for higher inflation and higher interest rates for the next decade. That's one way of playing it.
The economist for the Treasury this morning or yesterday was saying that the short-term inflation that they were expecting is now turning into sort of more medium, longer-term inflation. But I still think we haven't really paid for the great financial crash in 2008. We just quantitatively eased ourselves out of that. But there's still inflation to come from that hasn't come through yet. And if you've got underlying inflation, but you've got a lot of high levels of debt in the system, any increase that you've got, even on very, very low inflation rates that we've, interest rates we've got now, inflation and the differential is now quite big between interest rates and inflation. If you make those interest rates go up, you end up with a lot of unserviceable debt, and then that causes other systemic problems. So I think there's a lot of different bits playing in behind the scenes around what the policies are around inflation and interest rates as well.
That's very interesting. It seems to me, in my ignorance, really, because that's what it is, complete ignorance, that there's been this unbelievable increase in expenditure over a very short period of time, and somehow or other, that's going to affect things in ways that aren't nice. That's an instinctive reaction rather than anything else.
From a government point of view, if you've got 100 billion in debt, the easiest way of getting rid of it is to inflate it away. But if you've got high personal debt levels at the same time, you've got a problem, because you can't put interest rates up high enough without causing basically rioting. There's a really tight balance there between what you need to do from a taxation point of view to claw the money back versus inflating away the problem that you've got. We've also got a massive issue in the UK now with the separation from the EU separation, Brexit, around the disconnect between the pound and euro pricing as well. So we've also got exchange rate problems coming in. So then you've got FX effects on top of that as well. It's a bit of a mess, to be honest. But inflation rate, it can't go down. It has to go up at the moment. There's the only way it can go.
But we're kind of starting to see this in China at the minute with these Evergrande and a couple of these property companies where they've had just unserviceable debts where they're 2.5 times their balance sheet, and now China has said that you need to reduce it, and because of this housing market is just going up, they're trying to sell it, and kind of when you actually dig into it, they're selling assets in August, and then it was like, September, the assets they're not quite the value, as in we paid 100 million for them, and now they're not worth anything near that. So you're kind of starting to see, and will this cascade across to the rest of the economy? Because essentially money has been plus or minus close to 0% for the last 7-8 years. It's been, and then you see the same in like personal house prices. They're up 10-20% in pretty much any market you look at in the last year to 18 months. But the person who, if you didn't buy a house, your wages haven't gone up 10 or 18%. So every year you don't buy a house, if they continue rising, you get left further behind. And I'd imagine when you bought your house, Martin, you was much more manageable relative to your salary. Whereas nowadays, the person starting out, it's very hard as a single person to buy a house.
Yeah, it probably was. It seemed an awful lot at the time. My house was £12,000.
Rather than taping it.
But it did seem a lot of money. My income was about £3,500, I think, at that time. Funny, isn't it? When I started work, my income was £1,200 a year. And it was a lot of money.
But it's interesting, you keep referring back to the 70s because there was some very similar sort of economic. But what I'm just not smart enough to know is whether or not what we learned going through some of these things in the 70s really is applicable to today or not. I just don't know economics.
They didn't know what they were doing in the 70s, Steve.
I don't think
they
they
know
know
what
what
they're doing now.
Well, that's one constant in both cases, yes, for sure.
That's my rather crude take out of it all.
Yes. No, that's fair.
I think that's the tragedy, because no period, is truly comparable to another period. The mechanisms are still there, but they're all subtly or profoundly different. That's the problem with economics, I think. Yeah.
So Paul Boyton won't be joining us then.
I've not heard of him. I've told him to phone me and he hasn't, so he may well have given up. I do know that they had to try and find a computer that was logged in the university the last time he joined us. They were running around the building trying to find a computer that had sound and video. So, but I'm going to put you on the spot here because I know that Paul would have wanted to talk about dissertation and students.
Oh yeah.
And we've just had interactions about students. So would you like to just say a bit about what it's about? Because I think Paul will probably be plugging that in the very near future.
So Martin probably knows more than me in terms of how many years this scheme's been running, but it goes on and on and on, which is really great. We've had a student almost every single year for about 6 or 7 years now.
I think this is must be year 10 or 11.
Maybe more, yeah. And I think this year there are actually not that same as last year. Actually, not many DUG members who kind of had projects. Maybe this year was a little bit different. I don't know. I can't remember the full scope of them. But very very broad selection of projects as always. The one that we did this year was about trying to use satellite imagery or trying to detect vehicles in car parks using satellite imagery. And great because it just meant that we got 3 months of time for somebody to go and explore it and see what they could do. Finding, at least in our research, was that it's really, really difficult to detect cars on satellite images in car parks without loads and loads of kind of model training or custom model training and things like that. And actually the imagery that we've got in the UK is not really good enough, except for, and even the best thing that there is out there are the Google Maps images, and even they are not really good enough. And you've got no idea about the time in which that image was taken because it's just, the clearest possible sky. So for our purposes, complete, doesn't do what we want. But I mean, it's great because somebody can spend that time figuring that all out, and stopping us from doing it. I think the projects over time have got more and more sophisticated, but I think there's almost becoming a little bit of a disconnect between what we think is possible within 3 months as kind of on the industry side and what is actually in reality possible from an MSc student within 3 months. And I think we just need to be a bit careful.
Are they more productive than the corporate world? Is that what you're saying?
I think that it really depends on the student. Because you're either going to get a student who's remarkably productive, more productive than and then kind of the corporate world, or there's going to be a bit of a gap between the two. And there's definitely, we had to do a little bit of refining about what we thought was possible this year. Just because you kind of think, oh yeah, we can do this, we can do that, and actually that's not really the case. You can do a tiny portion of this thing in within 3 months, and it's and it's also made more complicated a bit doing it remotely. So you haven't got those kind of 2 or 3 meetings at the start where you can just talk talk face to face and go through it properly, to set up the project really, really well. Maybe other organisations have found that less of an issue. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know when Whitbread have evaluated doing some of these sort of placements, not specifically me, but other people in Whitbread or Lorraine or whatever. I think it's always been that fear of, it's the fear of the overhead, isn't it? Because there's no doubt about the fact that there's some talented people you could bring on board for a project to maybe do something which you don't have the time or the bandwidth to do in your normal working day, but you're almost taking on another full-time employee for a period of time. Oh my God, what are they going to be like? And so I think that's always been a bit of a barrier for when they look at these sort of projects. That, and I don't know to what extent you get to choose who you do the project with, but you don't have quite as much control as you would if you were recruiting somebody, so you don't know quite what you're going to get.
Yeah.
I think that's been a bit of a nervousness in terms of doing these sort of projects. I don't think Whitbread's done one of these, Doug.
Not my knowledge.
Placement
I can't
projects.
remember.
I don't think we have. No. So.
Mark, has GSK had students with education?
We had one once. It didn't go very well. It was, burnt fingers a little bit.
Is the support that you get from the university enough? Is it?
Yes, I mean, to be honest, we didn't really support at all on the technical side of things. That was all done by supervisors at UCL, of which you had a couple of great ones. But I think from year to year, it depends on how good or how interested your supervisor is at university. Last year, the university supervisor was absolute rubbish.
Does that mean not very good?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's almost a bigger variable than the student themselves, to be honest. The students have always been so enthusiastic and so up for it, and we have to choose between them after interviewing. But supervision can vary a little bit.
Okay.
Are there such things as sandwich course students around these days?
Something like placement years.
Placement years, yeah.
Yeah, it's still a thing. In fact, a lot of universities are really going back to promoting. I know my daughter's at Loughborough, and they really promote those sort of placement years just purely because it works quite well reciprocally with the organisations. That actually it's a try before you buy, and actually. You get to find out how good that person is, and when they finish their degree, they come out, they've got a bit of experience in your organisation, you've got a bit of experience about them, and you know whether you want to recruit them as a result. So it's very good, like employment ratios.
We had very good experiences with the sandwich course students we had.
Yes, Whitbread, I think,
I think 85, I think it was almost 100 passing through us over the years.
And I'd probably say it's 70–80% of them were very, very high quality. Yeah, very high quality. It's interesting how many of them came back to work full time for Whitbread.
No,
not that many, which is so someone missed a trick there, didn't they?
The point is that when we used to have 2 sandwich course students a year, and then we'd use an assessment centre to recruit new ones, including the 2 sandwich course students that were on part. Then we'd have a week's overlap where the 2 sandwich course students handed their work over to the 2 new sandwich course students, and it worked like magic.
But you see, now the difference with that, and maybe some of the stuff that Paul's doing, is the fact that
they're MSc students.
Well, yeah, but we effectively recruited them like they were employees. You get out what you put in. So we put them through assessment centres like we would employees. So therefore, we got really good candidates.
When we were at Whitbread,
when we were at Whitbread, when we did that, sandwich course students, if you don't have that control over who fits and who's going to come in and do great work, you start getting into a little bit more of a hit and miss experience as to how good the quality of work is. So you're going to get.
So I all suggest go back to sales school students.
Well, we're on our fourth now.
You're full sales school.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, and we've had, four or 8 people.
Yeah.
That are, obviously come in at a lower salary. Not a bad salary, but a lower salary. But do, take on, learn masters, go back and do their final year, and then, all of them have landed good jobs.
Not back with you.
No, actually, no, other places. But it's good, it's good to see. We get a lot out of it. They get a lot out of it. I'm sure at some points, we will have someone who comes back in Sainsbury's. It might be their first job. It might be, further on in their career. But massive part of our team.
Many of you had sandwich course students and how have you found them, Lisa?
We've done it the last 3 years. The quality of it's been really good to offer a role to one, but then the timing of it just didn't work out. Like you say, it's a really good way to someone will fit in your organisation and what they can contribute before with a full hire. It doesn't always work out. The trick is to be working with on the right courses and the things that are going to be most relevant. It can be a real perspective into what you're doing. So they may not have business experience, but some of the new skills and techniques that are coming through in analytics that they'll be picking up now that we don't necessarily have in our team. So I think it's good from a diversity point of view.
Have you ever had sandwich course students, Mark?
GSK does. We haven't had it in our team. We've struggled with anybody who's around for not been very long because of the amount of data we've got and the complexity of the system. The system's actually not too complex, but the data are quite complex. It takes such a long time to get somebody up to speed with everything. You kind of never get the return from the investment, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that'd be a lot more difficult now, actually, wouldn't it, when you're not with them?
It's a bit harder. We were having really good success with the apprenticeships instead. So we've got 2 apprentices now, and we're thinking of another one next year as well. So that for us is working better because we've got them for 4 years, and that makes the sort of 12-month learning process pay off for at least for another 2.5 years. That's for us is working much better. We had somebody came in who was on an NHS informatics degree who came in for 3 months, and it was just a waste of time. By the time she had any clue what we actually were doing in business, it was out again, and it didn't do her any good, and it didn't do us any good.
Yeah, Mark, I get that. I must admit, we've not had placement. Not in my recent time we've had placement students, or we've had some apprentices. And you're right, because they're there that much longer, it takes that pressure off those sort of admin short-term challenges of getting them up and productive. But you reap the benefit of them being there long enough to actually do something for you as well as you doing something for them. And it was always a challenge even when we had placement students back in the day, wasn't it? I know they used to, first 3 months they were solid learning, then they were sort of taking the training wheels off for sort of the next 3, sometimes up to 6 months, depending on the individual, and then they were highly productive in the last 3 months, and then they changed again, and you were like, and it was great because you had that turnover of fresh brain power and personalities in the team, which I know is something I think you probably really enjoyed, didn't you? Having fresh people coming through the door, keeping the place alive.
Fresh is much better than old.
Martin's always been someone who has surrounded himself with lots of young people. That sounds quite wrong, but I didn't mean it like that. But in terms of young thoughts and minds and stuff. But but in terms of getting the most out of the individuals themselves, it was always quite it was always quite hardcore trying to get that out of them in the 12 months, which is why I completely respect what Mark's saying about the apprenticeships.
Apprenticeships should be the future.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. The problem is it's that whole investment by the business, isn't it? You know,
There's a social dimension, isn't there, about the ludicrous cost of going to a university, whereas with the apprenticeship, the student is carrying very little cost.
true. When it's done well, it's really excellent. I think some companies just aren't as visionary about it.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that if anyone is thinking of having students through the CDRC dissertation, there's always an issue with paying the honorarium through your own banks because of the processes that you've all got in place. So if you do take on someone, Doug will pay them on your behalf and invoice you for it. We can do that at any time during the year, but if we can include it with the invoice that we send out for the membership, there's no admin charge. So there's a saving if you can let me know when I send out the invoices for renewing the membership. If you have students that go and do that, we will pay the honorarium for you. And I'll add it to the invoice, and there's no extra admin charge for that, which is what I do. I didn't charge, didn't let me know, did you? But I did it for Sainsbury's, and I've done it consistently since I joined Doug. So whatever obstacles there are along the way, the honorarium payment shouldn't be one. And I think feedback would be quite useful to Paul.
We kind of have to wrap up now, I think.
I think it almost is food as a ride. I'm really sorry that you can't join us in person for food. I think we've got enough to feed you.
There's a lot of
They could watch us enjoying us.
There'll be doggy bags galore.
To give you an insight, I went looking for some milk for the coffee in the fridge in the kitchen nearby, and it's full of wine. I don't know what these guys are planning on doing, but there's a party going on this afternoon, I can tell you. You know.
One thing I'd like to raise is the fact that this room is only on a tiny, is it on a tiny little screen view, the room? The room that's showing us here. Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see.
Is it very small?
It's not too small. I've got
Oh, that's,
You do have the option of changing your view to the main room or the thumbnails that you've got. Because we're seeing the three of you in large thumbnails and the room in a small one. So in your view options, you can see the whole room, which I'm assuming would be, if we were training, that's what people would probably opt for.
Are you just checking to see how good your lunch is? Full high definition.
I think people remote should be able to see the whole room. You see.
Yes, so they've got they can, but they have to change it there, and it's their view.
Yeah.
So
I think perhaps we should
Could have mentioned that.
yeah, to make sure that happens, otherwise they cut. You see, I find watching the screen, I'm cut off from the view of this room. I can't see myself, so that really is upsetting.
There's always one who just wants to watch themselves on the telly, isn't it? Well, no, thank you for the slides though, Lynn. They're really good, thank you.
Can you